Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Perpetual here. If you're new, you're warmly welcome. And thank you all so much for joining me today as we make some delicious beef stew with some rice vermicelli or vermicelli. How do you guys pronounce it? Let me know in the comment section. I am just getting started by cutting up my beef into smaller cubes that we're going to be using for our stew. And as always, the exact measurements will be in the description box below. Once I'm done cutting it up, I'm going to get it into the pot. And guys, of course, my beef is already cleaned. I'm getting it into my pot. I'm going to get my stove on. And I'm going to be seasoning it with about a tablespoon of my all-purpose seasoning mix, as well as some paste of ginger, garlic, habanero, and a bit of my all-purpose seasoning mix. I have a full video on how to make these too, so I will leave the link in the description box. And my beef is going to need a little bit of salt, so that's exactly what I'm adding now. I'm gonna give it another quick stir and then I'll cover it up and allow it to steam. And while our beef is cooking, I'm going to take that extra time to start prepping my ingredients so that our stew and our meal in general goes a lot faster and we do not waste any time. So I am just roughly chopping some onions that I'm going to be blending. When it comes to beef stew, I use quite a bit of onions. The ones that I'm blending will go to start the stew, and then I'm going to slice some and leave that for the end of the stew to act as garnish and a little bit of texture. And I'm checking on my beef and it is looking really good. I'm going to allow it to cook for a few more minutes so that it gets nice and soft because it is still a little tough. So I'm going to switch my pot. I'm getting my wok onto the stove, adding quite a bit of oil, and I'm going to start frying my beef. If your pot is not too big, make sure you fry it in batches so that it gets a nice golden brown. And once I am done frying it, I'm going to get the beef out of the oil. And guys, now I have amazingly flavored oil. So I'm going to make my stew in the same oil. I know it's a lot of oil, but I'll skim it off at the end. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and add my onions into my oil. I'm going to make sure that I get all of it out. And I'm going to give it a quick stir. And I'm going to lower my heat. The onions need a lot of time to cook down without burning. So since I have a good 10 minutes or so before my onions will be done, I am going to continue prepping the rest of the ingredients. So I have some habanero pepper and some bell peppers that I just got into the blender and set aside. And I am also roughly chopping my tomatoes and I'm going to set that aside to blend as well. And of course, while we're multitasking for this meal, you want to make sure that you go back to check on your onions to make sure it's not burning. Lower the heat a little bit more if you need to. So I'm going to start by blending my bell peppers and my habanero pepper mix. Once that is nice and smooth, I'm going to pour it out and set it aside and then start blending my tomatoes with a little bit of water. You want to make sure you don't use too much water when you are blending your tomatoes because the more water you add, the longer the stew will take. And again, make sure you check on your onions. You do not want this to burn because if it does, your whole stew is ruined. And so after about 15 minutes, I feel like the onions are now nice and reduced. So I'm going to go ahead and add my pepper and bell pepper mix into the onions and give it a quick stir as well. So once the pepper goes in, I'm going to let that cook for about another 10 minutes. And while I was at it, I realized that I had a bit of my chili oil in the fridge from my pepper sauce. Again, there's a recipe for that, so I'll leave that in the description box as well. I'm using it because it is packed with flavor. It is fragrant and it is just so good. So I needed to add a little bit of that into my stew as well. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add a few tablespoons of tomato paste to enhance the bold flavors of the tomatoes. Now, of course, the addition of the tomato paste is optional, but I prefer to use a little bit of it. And now we're gonna leave it to cook for a few minutes so that the flavors get really concentrated and it really darkens in color. But again, you want to make sure it does not burn. Once you get it looking like this, you can go ahead and add your freshly blended tomatoes into the stew. Give it a stir and let it cook for a good 10 to 15 minutes. And after that time, your stew will be looking amazing, rich in color and flavor. And we're going to up the flavor level by adding our leftover beef stock from when we steamed our beef, because we are not letting that go to waste. Now, after giving it a nice stir, I'm going to lower the heat and get started on my rice. For our rice, I'm starting with some oil, and once it warms up a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and add some sliced onions and allow that to saute on low to medium heat for a few minutes. Once the onions go in, you want to be patient with it to sweat it out, to let all the sweetness of the onions come out without rushing the cooking process. So just give it a few minutes to get nice and caramelized, and then you can keep going. And of course, remember to be checking on your stew so that it does not burn. And for today, I am using just regular spaghetti because that is what I have on hand. You can look for the thinner pastas to use, but spaghetti works very well. And all you're gonna do is on low to medium heat, just allow your spaghetti to get nice and golden brown without burning. Guys, do not make the mistake of leaving it unattended thinking that it is not brown enough. If you leave it, it will burn. And guys, you know I love my butter, so I am adding about a tablespoon of butter into my spaghetti mix right now, just to add to the richness and the flavor. I know I've said flavor so many times in this video, but guys, I kid you not, it really is exactly that. It is amazing. So once I get my spaghetti to a nice golden brown, what I'm gonna do is add a few cups of rice into my pot, and I'm going to toast the rice as well before I add water to it. So after about a minute or two, I'm gonna go ahead and add some water. The brand of rice I'm using today is Gino rice, and for this specific recipe, I find that using equal parts of water to rice turns it perfectly. So I have 2 cups of rice, so I'm adding 2 cups of water. If you like your rice a little harder and not too sticky, use a little less water. And if you want your rice a little bit stickier than what I will end up having, then use a little bit more. And I just added a little bit of salt as well, and I'm gonna give it a quick stir and then cover it up to cook. Now, of course, I used very little salt because the butter that I put in earlier was salted butter, so keep that in mind for when you're making it. And after about 10 minutes, we have this amazing looking rice that is not fully cooked, but I needed to give it a quick stir, and I'm going to cover it up. And while the rice cooks, I'm going to take this opportunity to get rid of all the oil from the stew. Now guys, of course, this did not go to waste. This oil was used for my jollof base stew the next day. And now that all the oil has been skimmed off, or at least most of it, I went ahead to add my beef, and I'm going to allow this to cook for about 10 minutes just to get the beef to soften up a little bit. And you know I love my curry powder, so I am adding about a teaspoon of curry powder into my stew immediately after I add my beef. And my stew needed a little bit of salt, so I'm getting a little bit of that in there too. And while the stew simmers away, I'm gonna go back and check on my rice, and it is looking good. It is nice and done. I'm going to fluff it up one more time, and then once the stew is done, our rice will also be ready to be served. When I make this recipe, I love a little bit more spaghetti than usual, so feel free to reduce it a little bit if you'd like. And for my stew, last but not the least, I am adding some sliced onions just to give it a little bit of texture. And guys, our meal is done. I have a little side salad as well, and our rice is ready. Our stew is looking amazing. And it is time to serve up our rice with some beef stew and a little bit of side salad as well. And the best part was we had a little bit left over for the next day. And before you even ask, yes, of course, you're invited to this amazing meal. Of course, I know you're gonna make it at home and you're gonna love it even more. My loves, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up, and remember to tell a friend about my amazing channel, and I will see y'all again very soon. Thank you all so much for coming along with me on this delicious journey. Take care, guys. Bye.